Well, in any case, it's wonderful to see so many people out. My name is Anne Stevenson. I'm a principal planner on this project. So I grew up just down the road from here, so I'm really thrilled to have the opportunity to work with the community here. I've already met some people through the revitalization strategy, and there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of fantastic energy, so it's a wonderful project to be working on. Just in terms of what I'm going to be talking to you about tonight, I'm going to start, I know we planners are often accused of using a lot of jargon, so I'm going to spend a bit of time trying to define some of the terms I'm going to be using throughout my presentation. Then I'll move on to Jasper Place in particular, why we're doing this process here. Next is probably the most important, which is how you can get involved and what sort of input we're looking for from the community in this process. And then as Scott mentioned, we're very lucky to be joined by Candace, who's going to be speaking about her experience as a community member, sort of the lessons learned for you and as well for the city. And then again, as Scott mentioned, we'll have a breakout session where we can have more focused discussions and answer any questions that you may have. So just to go through some of the terms that I'll be using, of course I've already used ARP, I'm sure, and so that stands for an area redevelopment plan. This is a vision for mature neighborhoods. What an area redevelopment plan does is it sets out policies and principles for land use. It's based on the local context, so it will be Jasper Place specific, and it provides clarity on how a neighborhood will redevelop in coming years. Which brings me to the next term, land use. So when we talk about land use, we literally mean what land is being used for. So is it being used to have buildings built on it? Is it being used for open space, for parks, for public space? It really all comes down to the physical aspects of the community, so the physical elements. And finally, zoning. Zoning is a land use tool, and it sets out in more detail the type, size, and location of buildings on land. So when we talk about type, that means is it going to be a home, is it residential, or is it going to be used as a store for commercial or restaurants? So that's sort of what's encompassed when we talk about zoning. And so now here we are in Jasper Place. So just as a general overview, the Jasper Place ARP process is going to give us a chance to build on the work that's been done in the revitalization strategy and come up with a local implementation strategy for citywide policies. So when we talk about Jasper Place, we mean Britannia, Youngstown, Kenora, Glenwood, West Jasper Place, and portions of the Stony Plain commercial corridor. Jasper Place has a really rich history, and if you haven't had the chance, I'd encourage you to look at the timeline that Madeline worked on. But you know, in the past century, it's gone from a single farm, Henry Goodrich's farm, to now being 4 separate communities with over 16,000 people. In Jasper Place's more recent history, it underwent a revitalization program with the city, and the revitalization strategy was approved by council in 2009. This strategy was developed from contributions with the community, lots of work from the volunteers of the local neighborhoods that's ongoing to this day. And the strategy identified 3 key goals. So we have feeling safe in our community, connecting with our community, and building our community. And under each of those 3 goals, specific action items were developed. And creating an area redevelopment plan for each of the 4 neighborhoods was one of the long-term action plans that was identified. So that's what brings us here today. So we're going to look to build on the work of the revitalization strategy in the context of citywide policies. So when I talk about citywide policies, I'm referring to some main documents that have come out from the city in the past 3 years. So this includes the Way Ahead. That's Edmonton's strategic vision. It has an idea for a compact, sustainable, and livable city. We also have the Elevate report, which was released earlier this year. Again, it focuses on creating strong, diverse, and sustainable neighborhoods. The Way We Grow is Edmonton's municipal development plan, and it sets out land use policies, and it has broad objectives to encourage growth in the mature neighborhoods, and to also focus residential employment and retail uses around the LRT stations. And the last two documents you see there are the residential infill guidelines and the transit-oriented development guidelines. And those give even more detailed guidance, generic guidance for situations across the city. So at a very high level, there are a lot of similarities between what we see in the revitalization strategy and what the citywide policies are. So the revitalization strategy talks about safe communities to live, work, and play, looks for neighbors and businesses collaborating together, and also looking for well-kept parks, schools, stores, and sidewalks. And that's mirrored very closely in what the citywide policy is, which is to create positive environments to live, work, and play, to get citizens engaged and working together, and also to create beautiful spaces, to create inviting public spaces and buildings. Even when we get to a bit more detail, a lot of the visions are still the same. So both the revitalization strategy and the citywide policies are concerned about stabilizing school enrollment as an example and attracting families, so rejuvenating family-oriented homes. The same goes for the city, focusing on the Elevate report in particular, focusing on the importance of schools in communities and also the importance of supporting family-oriented housing. So up until this point, there are a lot of parallels and a lot of similarities. But when we get to actually implementing that vision, how we get to those objectives, we see some very different approaches. So in the revitalization strategy and through other consultation with the community here, we've heard that the preservation of single-family homes is very important. And this relates back to the Newman's resolution, which is in place in West Jasper Place. And that's quite different from the vision of the city, which is focusing on the diversity of housing to attract families, and also the Elevate report refers to semi-detached housing as well. So we started with these two visions that were very similar, but the implementation, actually achieving those visions, is very different. So that's our challenge. That's what we have ahead of us in the ARP, is figuring out how we can take the citywide policies and the local aspirations and achieve our shared vision for the Jasper Place area. So one of the ways we hope to answer some of these differences between the two is to go through a learning scenarios process. And it's really to answer the question, what does redevelopment mean for Jasper Place? So we'll look at three different scenarios. We'll look at a scenario that's similar to the Newman's resolution, where there isn't much increase in density, and then looking at another scenario where there might be a slight increase in density. And through each of these scenarios, we're going to track some key community indicators. So something like school enrollment. You know, in the scenario where you might have no increase in density, what happens to families? And we've hired some consultants to help us with that work, who have a lot of experience doing those types of models. And the learning scenarios is also just really about working with you as the communities. So we need your input to make sure that these scenarios make sense, to make sure that we're tracking the right community indicators. We have a board at the back where we've listed about 10 issues that we've heard from the community that are important, but we want to be sure that we have your input throughout the evidence team process. So if you're interested, you can come speak to me afterwards, but we're looking for 15 people to join the evidence team and help us with this. And that will be our first phase. Also in our first phase, another thing that we've heard and that we know is very important to this community is around housing. So we're proposing to work with our colleagues in the housing department and an external consultant as well to work on a housing assessment for the area. So again, it's really about engaging with you, understanding what your aspirations are for housing, and understanding what's available right now in your communities. What options do families have in this area, and maybe where there are gaps, and what sorts of programs might be able to support reaching those goals. The housing assessment and also the learning scenarios is going to inform the subsequent phases of the ARP. So just in a snapshot, this is sort of how we see it running. So phase one, that's the learning scenarios and the housing assessment, is running from now until sort of January of 2013. In the spring of next year, we're going to be coming out again and looking at some more detailed issues and options. In the summer, we'll start drafting the plan together, some of the policies, presentation to council in the fall of next year, and then adoption and implementation. And as you can see along here, this might not be the best legibility from the back of the room, but under each of these phases are all the different ways that you can get involved and all the different ways that we're looking for your input. All this information is available on our website, and yeah, where we're hoping to get to, where we're going, is to sort of take these three sides of the triangle. So we've got city policy, the city context. We have your input, the community, the local conditions that we need to take into consideration, and those two being supported by a really robust evidence base. So the learnings that we get through the learning scenarios and housing assessment and technical studies as well. So all three of those components, and as you can see, we can't do it without your input. It's a critical part of the process. So now I'm very pleased to hand this over to Candace Dorsey. She's the Vice President of the Boyle Street Community League. Boyle Street is a different community from Jasper Place. It has different challenges, different opportunities. But the reason we asked Candace to speak today is that she's had the experience as a community member working with the city in a comprehensive planning process. So Candace is going to offer her insights, some advice for us and for you. So please welcome Candace.
I think I'm here because I'm an unregenerate volunteer. I seem to volunteer for lots of things. I seem to get involved in the communities that I live in and in different ways. So I come from a bit of a different perspective than a paid planner does. And so I was asked to talk a bit about what was our overall experience with development in Boyle Street neighbourhood, biggest challenges and success factors so far. What do I know now that I wish I'd known at the beginning? What approaches help us work effectively? What could the city have done or provided to make the process more effective? What did the city do that worked and should work again? And any kind of general do's and don'ts for the community to consider. So that's a long list, but really it comes down to a few things that I think are really important. So I'll just tell you a bit about my experience in Boyle Street so that you'll have some context. I've lived in Edmonton all my life. I'm one of those rarities. I was born here. I was born in the Royal Alex Hospital, the old one, old red brick one. And grew up mostly on the south side, had lived in what's now Cromdale Parkdale and worked in the Community League when I was quite young. Then lived in Ramada Housing Co-op in Old Strathcona for 17 years and worked on that board and worked a great deal with activation in the arts community. I'm a writer and an editor. 10 years ago, a little more than 10 years ago, my partner and I moved into the Boyle Street neighborhood. And I have to confess that part of the reason we moved there was because that was where the houses were cheapest. And if you're a working artist, you don't have a lot of disposable income. But there were other reasons too. We looked quite extensively in a whole range of areas, and the area that actually seemed to have the biggest heart in that part of the city was Boyle Street. Oddly enough, it seemed more welcoming. Boyle Street hasn't had a good reputation for almost all the time that I've been paying attention. So I'll say since I was a kid in grade 6 or so, and people were talking about Boyle Macaulay, and yet oddly enough, it's in some categories lower in certain kinds of crime than other at-risk neighborhoods. It is quite welcoming. It's got a long-term neighborhood feel, and my memory of growing up in Edmonton is that Jasper Place had a bit of a reputation too. It was not just working class, but kind of rough. And those kids from JP High School, you had to watch out with them and so on. Well, really, when when you actually went to the community, it was very different, right? It was, from the inside, it was very different. So there's a kind of similarity in terms of some of the challenges that, that communities such as Boyle Street and JP face. And that similarity is partly based on the fact that we're now all communities that are fairly close to the heart of the city. I mean, when I was a kid and you drove through Jasper Place, you came to the edge of the city pretty quick. Now, it's just the beginning. So our experience has changed a great deal. And what often happens with cities as they develop is that neighborhoods that are closer to the core go through cycles of ups and downs. And right now in Boyle Street, we've been having a lengthy down, and we're on the way up. And so maybe my experience is a bit different than the situation in Jasper Place, but I think there's some of the same stressors: housing, development, LRT. So coming to these processes as a volunteer, I think sometimes we face some frustrations. We're not paid. We're putting in our own time. Sometimes there are too many meetings, and they last a long time, and you get a feeling that one voice in the crowd isn't going to work, or you're not seeing the outcomes you want. And sometimes people who are community activists get burnt out. I was really lucky in that in a very formative time in my 20s that I went to a lecture by the Canadian writer Jane Rule, and I really can't remember anything else she said except 3 words. And they were, politics is housework. And hearing those 3 words changed my attitude toward community work for life, because I understood that we don't just look at a problem, get a solution, and it's done, and we can all go home and relax. Our lives in a city together, in communities together, is constant change, constant movement. Sometimes the changes go a little different than we hope, sometimes not. But everyone in the community and everyone in the processes really cares. Even the people who disagree completely 180 degrees with us, whoever we are and whatever our opinions, they care very much for the outcome. And everyone believes that we're doing what we can for our community. So looking at it as a cyclic process like that, and looking at it as something that you do a little bit at a time all the time, sort of like vacuuming up the dust bunnies or doing the dishes, or, you know, cooking dinner one day, but the next day you do it again. Those kinds of things. That has really helped me to understand the limits of my individual power in doing community work. Now, the other thing that a mentor of mine said to me very early in my career was, are you prepared for this process to fail? And that, again, is a piece of wisdom that I carried forward with me. But I've changed it, I think, a little bit in terms of, am I prepared not to get 100% of what I personally think I should get out of the process? Because sometimes, I mean, here we are in a room together. There must be, how many people are here? If we all compared, as you sit around the tables and we put our input in, there's going to be a huge variety. There may be agreement on some core principles, and then how to reach them is debated hotly. So when I ask myself the question, am I prepared for a process to fail? Sometimes the answer is, no, I care too much about this process. I care too much about this part of my community, and so I'm going to fight. I'm going to keep fighting for something that I think is right. Sometimes the process does fail. I mean, in our community, we had a battle to slightly change the route of the LRT. And we worked on it for about 15 to 18 months, and it didn't change. What's the outcome of that? Well, I could have gone home feeling burnt out and really annoyed and then stayed home. But the community was still there, and the community needs were still there, and the desire to make our community work was still there. So the group of us who worked on that process, which we called the LRT working group, came back to the table to say, let's see what we can do to to mitigate the impact and to make the community work. So out of that came a process. Well, City Council was able to hear us saying that we needed that process. They helped by asking the administration to work with us on that process. And out of it came possibly one of the more effective workshops I've been in the community in the 3 years that I've been working in Boyle Street on this work. It was a workshop where all the parties who cared about what was going on in this corner of the community got together in one room. I think I counted 7 city initiatives and many groups of volunteers from different parts of our community. And everyone was talking about the same questions at the same time. A little bit like the process I think you're about to go into. So I think that was possibly one of the more effective things that the city was able to do for us. But once you've had input in that way, you also have to keep an eye on the process to make sure that your input stays accurate or stays on point. So it's a process that carries on and may change over time. The other thing that I want to be sure to talk about, and these are all like bullet points, which I could talk about each one in more detail, but I want to talk about the balance between firm goals and compromises. And this is my second last bullet point. We try as communities to do 2 things, and one of them is to stand up for ourselves, and the other one is to listen and adapt to all the voices in the community. And those are sometimes 2 things that are difficult. And when you add a citywide perspective, a city council who's responsible for making decisions on behalf of the whole city, it's a very complicated process, and you don't always, in the words of the Rolling Stones, you don't always get what you want. But you can, I think, get what you need. The last thing I want to say is that every individual in the process has far more power than they think. This has been really obvious to me watching the development of the projects in Boyle Street. A long, long time ago, before the current planners were working on the development of what's called the quarters in Boyle Street, an unfortunate planner stood up and made an unfortunate choice of words. It was the only story I ever heard from the first quarters meeting, which was that the planner said this area is a tabula rasa. It's a blank slate. Because there were a lot of empty lots, parking lots. But that didn't mean there wasn't a community. And the community let whoever that person was know pretty quick. But I've also noticed that in the years since I've been involved, there was initially a planning committee called Boyle Renaissance Advisory Committee. I heard the first report to council, and I joined the second phase of the committee, and that was before I belonged to the Community League. In all those years, the plan has changed dramatically, and it's changed sometimes because of a few key people. A few people who ask questions, who says things like, what's happening to the historic buildings in the community, or what's happening to the shadow populations, the homeless, the underhoused? How will our community nature be affected by densification and change? What happens to existing seniors facilities when the community densifies? Will there be community gardens? Will there be arts in the community? So, for instance, on a site which was in the original quarters plan, shown as a big high box of some sort of high rise, this will now be developed as the Artists' Urban Village, which is housing, yes, but it's artist housing. It's going to have cultural component. A new hotel is kitty corner from that. So there will be a real, and kitty corner from that is a major senior center with over 500 seniors. All of these things are very diverse, and yet there's going to be a great what's the word? Synergy, I guess, is the buzzword between them. But the thing that has changed is that the nature of the community is taken into account by the planners. So individuals have power, volunteers have power. The other thing I want to say is the city is us. I mean, it really is. It's us. We elect our council hires the administration. That's us in action. So the city, I've always gotten a lot further by assuming that we're allies. They may be allies who don't quite know what they're supposed to be doing yet. And so I'm prepared to help tell them, as I hope everyone in this room is. But to see it as a kind of monolithic bureaucracy that has nothing to do with us is a basic major mistake. We have a huge amount of ability to change what happens. And I guess the end of my story about change in our neighborhood is we ended up as a community league with a housing policy about non-market housing that was inclusive. Now we're in what are, I think they're called the high-stress communities or what, and some of them have had to draw the line in terms of social housing or social agencies, and they've made that choice. In our community, we recognized that densification was going to change our community lots more than having some
It's okay.
than having some additional social housing, non-market housing, or harm reduction facilities, that sort of thing. So, as a community, we made a choice to be welcoming. Now, down the road, our percentage might change, the way our community is structured might change. That we can't foresee. But what I've noticed now is that by making that decision, we have altered the nature of how the planning is so that it includes everyone in our community, from the most well-off to the most challenged and threatened. And I think that has made a difference. So the bottom line is we keep doing our housework, and we keep coming back to the table. Some people listen better than others, both within our community and within the administration. That's how life is. But it's not going to deter me anyway from, what's that commercial about wiggles wobble but they don't fall down? You know, you take a blow sometimes, but you come back to the table. And I think faith in the process, healthy skepticism, some energy, but also some understanding that you limit your energy and you share amongst your community so that everybody helps do the job. Those would be my words, and I'd certainly be glad to answer questions later, and I hope I haven't gone on too long. But I mean, it's so exciting to see a huge room full of people who really care about their community, and I hope I've been able to be helpful. Thanks.
Thanks again, Candace. In terms of next steps, so as always, we really want to hear from you. If you haven't had a chance to fill in a sign-in sheet, it'd be great if you can give us your contact information. We'll keep you posted as we go through the next few phases. We also just want to let you know that everything that we hear tonight, we're going to do some breakout sessions now. We are going to share that on the website. So the website is a good point of contact for information moving forward. And again, stressing the opportunities that we have right now to get involved. So that's joining the evidence team if you're interested in the learning scenarios. We're also going to be having some activities focused around housing coming up in the next few months. So we'll be keeping you posted again if you sign up. You can also sign up for a mailing list online as well. So lots of opportunities to get involved now, and then many more in the future. So we look forward to working with you moving forward.